This week on Hike and Hearth Birding, we're exploring the excitement of spring migration right here in our own backyard and sharing how one little device is helping us tune into it all.
And if you've ever wondered how to photograph birds in flight or how to even spot them in action, we're breaking down some of my favorite shots and tricks behind capturing those fleeting moments.
Plus, we've got an exciting update on our wood duck Nestbox. Who's ready for babies? Stay tuned for the full story. So we gave Dustin his Father's Day gift, or one of them, a little bit early this year so he could actually use it during spring migration. It's called a PUC, PUC, and it's a new AI-powered bioacoustic device from BirdWeather, who has partnered with Cornell's University Center of Ornithologists, or
Lab of Ornithology.
There we go. To identify birds by their vocalizations. So it's been running in our yard for a few days now, and we wanted to talk about what we're seeing so far because it perfectly ties into the fact that spring migration is here. Is that correct, Dustin?
Yeah, absolutely. Spring migration is 100% underway. We are in the thick of it right now.
So, Dustin, why don't you explain to the viewers what exactly is the BirdWeather PUC and how does it work?
Well, one thing to know about Lynn is she gives good gifts.
I do.
So the PUC is a passive acoustic device that sits out in your yard or wherever you place it, and it uses AI to identify birds by song. So it's a little bit like Merlin, except it picks up audio continuously, whether you're in live mode or recording it for later uploads. So you can take it like when you're hiking or something like that if you want also. And then it cross-references the sounds that it finds with the BirdNet neural network so that it automatically IDs your recordings and stores them to the cloud. And then it takes all that data and aggregates it into a dashboard that's displayed on the BirdWeather app website.
Okay. That's very, very cool, which is why I bought it for you, because I thought it was cool. And for the record, before we get into what this technology is showing us so far about our local area, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer that this is not sponsored content. BirdWeather did not reach out to us. I legitimately stumbled across this product and thought it was really cool and wanted to impress Dustin because I didn't think he knew about this product.
And I have to say, I did know about the product, and it didn't quite appeal to me because I didn't fully appreciate how it works. So I do really like the gift, even though it's something I knew of but thought I wasn't interested, if that makes sense.
All right. So moving this forward, what I would like to know is, based on what you're seeing, either from your own observations or in the few days that you've been using the PUC, would you say migration has officially arrived here in eastern Massachusetts?
Yeah, we are full on sending it for migration time. Birdcast, one of the FAQs on Birdcast that people ask is, when is peak migration for my area? And their answer for pretty much all of Massachusetts is that it's May 10th to 22nd. So we are right in the center of peak migration time.
Okay, so I've just pulled up Birdcast since you mentioned it. Can you kind of walk us through some of the interesting details as you see them based on, so this page is for Massachusetts. For our viewers, you can go in and search your local area, your state as well, to see what's going on in more local to you.
That's right. So last night we can see they recorded over 1 million birds passing during the night. The peak night so far was 1.4 million birds. And so we're right in the middle of it. It gives us some graphs about where the major traffic was, flight direction and speed and stuff like that. But especially it's great for pointing out the expected migrants based off of historical data. And so this is a list of really interesting birds, some of which we're going to talk about later in the podcast, including the American redstart, the eastern kingbird, and it gives you an idea of what else to be on the lookout for, whether you're looking for particular warblers, yellow warblers, chestnut-sided are on their way in, or you're into the scarlet tanagers. I love the great crested flycatcher. The magnolia is a great photographic target. So it's a really great way to familiarize yourself with what is incoming so you know what to be on the lookout for when you're out in the field. All right, so we're taking a look at our specific PUC weather station. I've selected it from here inside of Massachusetts. Of course, you can zoom into exactly where you are, but we're not going to do that. And because I've selected my bird weather station, it is filtered to exactly the species that my station has recorded. And I wanted to talk about the warbling vireo because although it's a plainish bird, it's a really good bird to understand the call from because they call like incessantly. So this bird, even though it's nowhere near as prevalent as house sparrows and tree swallows and mourning doves, it's calling like all day long. All day long. 3,000 times it's been recorded in just the last 7 days. And I'll tell you, the PUC was not even on 50% of the time during that. So it's a really good bird for new birders to be in tune with and be able to sort of know when they've arrived because they're once you know them, you sort of can't stop hearing them.
And we have a recording that we can play for the audience right now, right?
Yeah, we can do that. In fact, we can play it directly from our sightings even. And I'll play that one more time. And it's called a warbling vireo because it kind of warbles and it just goes on and on. But to me, I think of it as like doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. So anyway, it was a really good bird to highlight the PUC capturing. And it's a good one because, you know, it's a little tough to see, but if you focus on it, it calls so much, you often can find it. It's a really good, fun bird. I enjoy seeing them every single year. Interestingly, too, this wasn't one we were going to highlight, but listen to what we got when it detected the osprey. It's this chirp that's right in here that we were sitting out in the yard. I didn't even catch it.
I didn't even realize they chirp.
They kind of do, but it's just a single note.
Okay, so that was the warbling vireo. What is the next bird that you wanted to cover?
The next one that surprised me, I like to, while I'm working, keep my window cracked and notice if I hear something out of the corner of my ear. And I heard kind of an interesting sound that I didn't immediately recognize. I had to think about it for a second. And as I went through, I realized I thought it was an American redstart. So I went to my app on my phone to see what my PUC had recorded. And sure enough, 2 minutes before, it had recorded the American redstart. So this is a bird that is a warbler, even though it doesn't say warbler in the name. And it's really striking. I'm not sure if you can see it on here, but it's got like, the male is mostly black with kind of red on its wing and kind of a bright spot on its tail there. But I went to that and I listened to it and let's hear what it sounds like. You can see really clearly on the on the sonograph this time what it sounds like. Oh, it's weird. It tries to highlight where the call is and sometimes it gets it wrong, which is interesting. But if you go back and play it from the start, here it is. So that's one that I hear of as a very just a tee, 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 tee. It's really nice knowing that this is the sound that was recorded in our yard because birds do have regional dialects and stuff too. So it's not just what a bird might sound like if it was a recording from the West Coast or something like that.
So why were you excited to see that this bird has popped up in our area? What's special about the American redstart?
They're one that are mainly just seen during migration. They do nest in our area generally, but mostly farther north. So I usually only get to see them a couple times per year. And it's definitely the first time I had seen or heard one in our yard. So it was a new yard bird for us. When you have the redstart selected in the menu, it's then also showing you all of the places where the redstart song was detected from.
All right. So the next bird you had on the list is the black-throated green warbler. Like, wow, that's a name. That's a really descriptive name for this bird.
It is, and the black-throated green warbler you can see is pretty common, especially during migration times. They like it really high up in the trees, and they have a really distinctive call. That kind of the mnemonic for that is a z z z zoo z, so it's easy to remember. Z z z zoo z. So that's what you can try to listen for. And
yeah, you hear it right at the end.
That part really at the end. So it did a pretty good job of picking that out. The black-throated green warbler is a striking warbler. Really fun to see. It likes, like I said, high in the canopy and also along edges. So if you live near the edge of a forested spot, that's a good place to look for or listen for that z-zoo, z-zoo, z sound.
So the next one that Dustin wanted to talk about is the northern water thrush.
Yeah, so this one was also super interesting to me because I saw it in the data and I had definitely not heard it. Now, we live on the shore of a lake. I've had northern water thrush around the lake, but over in the, unpopulated, undeveloped area of the lake, I hadn't seen it here directly. And this is, although it doesn't have it in the name, it's also a warbler that acts like a shorebird. And you can see they're much less commonly recorded because they're, quiet for the most part. And I didn't know this call at all. So I was very interested in hearing what it had recorded for it. So let's see. It got that one right too. What we have is red-winged blackbird sort of starting, and then you hear the northern water thrush again. So I'll go back to the spot. It's sort of that downward part. So anyway, that one was also exciting for me because it was a new bird that we hadn't had recorded in the yard.
Okay, so the last one that you had on the list is the eastern kingbird. And I've actually heard you refer to this guy as a bit of a tough guy at times.
Yeah, eastern kingbirds are really fun to observe. They're called that because they basically are fearless. They'll chase away any bird of any size. They defend their territory. And they're in the flycatcher family, so they're pretty easy to see. They're always flying out, grabbing insects from on the wing. And so they're, again, for new birders, really fun to see. They kind of have a chittering sound that's kind of hard to pick up, but it looks like it zeroed in on this area, but it's highlighted this other area, so I'm curious what... Yeah, that chittering is pretty right. Yeah, so it's kind of faint, but you can hear it in the properly highlighted segment, so it's kind of like these parts of the graph.
Can you play it one more time? You hear it like dee, 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 dee.
Yeah, but a little more chittery than that. But
yeah.
Yeah, and so they're a good bird. They're, like I said, they're easy to spot. They're mostly black on the back with a black kind of long tail, but it looks like it's been dipped in a can of paint is the way to remember that. And you can see that they're very heavily reported to with all those sightings.
And for the record, I'll also say what you're seeing up on this map on this website, we're not logged in right now. So if you go to the website and you click on Explore in this top right corner, you can come to the Data Explorer, right? And you can just start putting in information on location and whatnot, and you'll be able to see what's coming up in different areas, correct?
Exactly. And you can use the filters on the left-hand side to filter to a specific species or a specific listening station and a specific time window to see what's been heard. And if we filter this to everything that's been heard in our yard, it has a record of every single recording that was made. So you can see all of these warbling vireo calls, and you could play any one of them, and then where they occurred and all that kind of stuff. So it is really, really aggregating the data automatically. And this is the place where it really exceeds what Merlin can do, because you wouldn't want to store all these recordings on your phone for Merlin and be kind of uploading them and stuff. So the fact that it's automated is really where the value is for this.
It's really cool what it can do, but we're still in the early phases of experimenting with this device, right?
Yeah, I'm sure we can probably get into it a little bit more deeply as we move forward. But I've been using it in the front yard and the backyard. The front yard when I'm working during the work week, so I can maybe hear stuff too. But we'll definitely be bringing it along on hikes, see what it records in other locations while we're kind of on the move. You can pair it to your phone, so it uses that as a microphone if you prefer also. I will say in the early returns, I think the hearing on it isn't quite as good as my human ear. I've heard a couple of birds like flying, like I heard ravens the other day flying by that it did not pick up, that I heard and which Merlin heard. And I've seen it misidentify a couple of things. It told me we had greater yellowlegs here, which is an ocean shorebird that wouldn't be crazy to have at the lake. But I think it misheard a robin and thought it was a greater yellowleg. So it's not perfect, but it is very good, and I've been impressed with it so far.
We'll probably do a full review of this later in the season, maybe as a featured topic, and walk you through it in more detail. We thought it was a fun way of giving you guys a snapshot of what is coming through our yard now that the birds have finally arrived. Dustin, would you agree with that?
You definitely agree. And we'd love to hear from listeners. What have you been noticing in your yard lately?
So photographing birds in flight, to me at least, seems like one of those skills that should be impossible. Then again, I only know how to use a camera on the auto settings. So today, what we thought we would talk through is 5 of Dustin's in-flight photos. Okay, so I thought we could start by understanding the story behind this photo that we've pulled up on the screen. So to begin with, can you kind of walk us through where and when this image was taken and kind of how you came upon this moment?
Yeah, my favorite style of birding is by kayak in the morning, which brings several advantages. So this was, dawn or very shortly after dawn on a kind of a steamy early summer, late spring day, which was creating the fog off the cool water. This photo was actually pretty beginner level when I took it, and I was using my older camera. This was a Canon 70D, kind of a 2015-ish era Canon. The flyby of the heron was luck. I certainly didn't know that the heron was going to fly by me within 15 or 20 feet, but the image was a result of having used my camera settings adjusted to the environment. So I was focused on the shoreline in the distance and the fog and exposed to the right light. And I love this picture for a couple of reasons, particularly the way that the wing is just off the water as the bird flew by. Obviously, it's partly a silhouette, but you get some nice detail in the wing. And I love how you can see the light shining through the beak, actually. It's a really cool detail of that one.
Yeah, right in that one little spot, like right at the top of the beak.
Yeah, and you don't always get to pick your background, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later, that the background is really important for all birding images, but particularly birds in flight can really add to the artistic creation.
So I have one other question for you. Did you underexpose this photo manually, or was this just the nature of the sunrise fog of the environment?
I wasn't intentionally underexposing the bird, but I was exposing to the background, which is a little bit opposite of what I'm going to tell you later.
Okay.
But you can notice the fog and the sort of the lake was the scene I was adjusted to. The bird came through, and you're right, it's a little bit underexposed, but that's what creates the artistry of this image, and it creates a nice contrast. It's sort of like low-key contrast between the dark bird and the light fog and stuff. And it was also kind of lucky that the background lined up really nicely with the line of the fog in the background.
So we've got 2 eagle photos we're going to show. This is the first one. And these images are really packed with a lot of action. So what I'm curious about is how do you plan or anticipate a moment like this?
You certainly can't always anticipate a moment like this, but you have to know your environment and the scene that could present itself. So notice in this photo, and I'm glad that you picked this one because I don't think it's like the greatest artistic photo, but I love that you love it anyway.
Well, look at his feet. Like, there's so much, you can see the power in this animal right in this shot.
Agreed. And so this was sort of March when the ice was melting off the lake and there were some dead fish that were kind of melting out of the ice. And knowing that those are good conditions is what made this scene possible. So on this day, you and I went for a walk down the street and I brought my camera just because I knew it was a good time to maybe see bald eagles up in the sky. They like the ice edges when the ice is melting away. They like to forage out of the ice because they're really bad hunters, right? This is a good image that sort of is what you might think of an eagle grabbing a fish out of the water, but they kind of suck at hunting that way. They'll steal a fish from an osprey or from another eagle or something. They certainly can catch a fish from the water, like if you're at a really target-rich location like Conowingo Dam or something like that, which is a photography hotspot. But most of the time, they're happy to scavenge trash or roadkill or a frozen fish coming up out of the ice like this. But it's also a good image for a couple of reasons. We can see it's a little bit grainy. I had my ISO set really high. In this case, it was up at about ISO 1000, which on a lot of modern cameras would not be a problem at all. But on my Canon 70D, you can see it introduced quite a bit of grain here based off of my other settings. I also was probably a little too fast on the shutter speed here. It was 1/3200th of a second, which probably isn't necessary for a large bird like this. And I was fully maxed out at my 400 millimeter zoom. But it also highlights that bald eagles are notoriously difficult to photograph because your camera is always hunting for what's called middle gray in an image. And middle gray on a bird that's nearly black and white makes a scene like this where like the wing feather detail is lost, the wing is really dark, and the head is a little bit overblown. It's sort of too bright. The camera struggled for either of those targets because it was right in the center, but it made for a good action situation, if not a perfect image. But I do really like the image that resulted.
All right. And so now here's our second image of him trying to fly away with his fish, and it looks like it just dropped. Did he end up getting it?
He did. We had a couple minutes with this bird. He picked up the fish and kind of dropped it and went after it again. This one, unlike the last picture, shows a lot of really great feather detail, even though the face is still overexposed a little bit. But it's really nice in that you get a much better shot of the fish, and you can sort of tell that the fish like escaped its talons or something like that and has fallen, so it creates an extra bit of drama to the image. And again, it lines up nicely with the horizon in the background to see the eagle against the ice rather than competing with the trees and stuff like that.
Okay. So I have a photography question too. I just got distracted worrying about whether or not this guy got his dinner in the end or not. But so were you shooting in burst mode or like single frame? Like what was going on from a setting standpoint?
Yeah, pretty sure I definitely was in burst mode, which is, for you new photographers, holding down the shutter button so it goes tick, 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 and catches as many pictures as you can. On that camera, I think it was only 3 or 4 frames per second, which is fine, but my new camera makes 15 frames per second by comparison. So that kind of is probably why I ended up, with more pictures of the fish falling than I did with it in the talons in this case.
Okay, so you've taken a lot of Nestbox photos over the years. This is like another one of my all-time favorite moments. In fact, I moved our screen so that it wouldn't be in the way of this amazing daddy who's coming to feed his babies. What's the trick to capturing moments so like precisely like this?
Yeah, well, this one obviously is the preparation of having the box and creating the habitat and stuff. It's the long game of bird conservation so that you have opportunities like this. And then knowing the schedule and what was going on in the box to know, when stuff was going to happen. But then in the shorter term, around when this image was taken, I obviously was able to observe multiple feeding instances and chances to practice. This photo includes the hand of man, because obviously that's not a natural nest cavity. But it creates a lot of visual interest because you've got the subject is the dad bluebird with a bug in its beak, bringing food to the baby, and you can really see both the dad's eyes locked in on the target as well as the baby watching the dad come in. So there's a lot of stuff to look at in an image like this. And one like this gives you an opportunity to hone the settings for your camera. You get multiple opportunities like this. I mentioned before that I had shot that eagle too fast at 132 hundredths of a second, way too fast for a slow moving bald eagle, which is what created that high ISO in the grain in the earlier image. This one is 1/1000th of a second, which is about the slowest you would want for a small bird in flight. So I had probably worked my way down to figure out that that's the right spot, because it froze the bird's body and its head, but left just enough of the wing blur to create that action. I was also at 400 millimeters, so kind of in my yard, but 30 or 40 feet away, wide open at 5.6 f-stop on my camera. And I'm pretty sure I was using ISO auto, which came out to be at ISO 1000, which is interesting because this is the same ISO 1000 that we had seen for the bald eagle before, but there's no grain in this picture at all because the other settings were more honed in.
And then we have this photo, which I always think is really fun. He looks like a little torpedo coming out of the nest as well. It's incredible. It's like so precise of a shot of him flying. What are your comments on this one?
Yeah, this one also is burst mode. This was the newer camera, my Canon R7. So this one captures about 15 frames per second, depending on the settings. They were about the same in terms of shutter speed and stuff as the last one, but this one lines up really nicely. Instead of having the wings kind of open and showing the action, it's just the wing tips, and the fact that they're in line with the body gives it that torpedo look. I don't recall if it was the same burst mode that I saw the dad fly in and fly out with, but it could have been the exact same sequence with the same settings, although I can see from the metadata of this photo that the ISO is a little higher at 1250. Actually, the background is a little bit different as well, so I do think it's probably a separate instance of this feeding action. So it's another one where it's a real obvious target, not as much eye movement taking you from one subject to another, but it still has that hand of man, which is okay, but I don't love it. But it does tell the story that there was, some Nestbox action going on, which is kind of my thing.
I think it's interesting because I know you don't love the hand of man, but the thing for me is this is conservation work in action. And so I think there is kind of an importance to showing these nest boxes, right?
It's absolutely part of the story. It's just the type of thing that wouldn't win any prizes at a photography salon. So
now we're moving on to Mama Bird. We finally are seeing her, and she's been doing some house cleaning, it looks like. So yeah, what do you want to tell us about this picture?
So this one I think is a little bit better artistically because there is no hand of man, or actually there's a little bit. Do you see it?
No.
I've cropped it out, but I believe this mama bird was taking off from the top of our fence, and you can just see that straight line of the fence post under her one claw.
Oh, yeah.
But you could easily crop that out and remove it. But the claw, I think, tells a little bit of a story, and without any more, you can't tell if that's a branch or anything else. But I love this one because it's a pure bird in flight. It's got a really nice bouquet, the soft background in the distance. Oftentimes, good bird photography starts by choosing your background, or at least selecting a background that's kind of off in the distance. And by using a tight f-stop, in this case it's 5.6 again, which is the maximum for my lens at that focal length of 400 millimeters, it really does a good job of blurring out those green tree leaves in the background and bringing the subject into focus. And, the male bluebirds get all the attention, but this female is really striking too. And of course, any bird with a bug in its mouth on its way to the nest box tells its own story.
Well, I don't think that's a bug in her mouth, though.
Oh, that's a good point. I think it was a fecal sac.
So gross. So gross. But figures. Mom's doing the job, cleaning the house. Like, she's a good mama.
That's right. For those of you that don't know, bluebirds and many birds don't soil their nest. Those baby birds hold their butt up in the air and kind of present a little sack of their poop to the mom or dad who grab it and fly it away from the nest and drop it. So bluebird nests are nice and clean even after those babies fledge. And this is the mom taking away one of those fecal sacs.
It's a dirty job sometimes, isn't it, moms and dads? But she's doing her thing. All right. So what amazes me about this next picture, moving on from bluebirds to tree swallows, is that they're so fast. They're so like little acrobats, like just fluttering around. Like I have never, ever managed to get a picture of a tree swallow. So how did you even like see this moment to be able to photograph it? These birds are lined up perfectly.
Well, the good part is out in nature when they're feeding, they're coming every 3 to 5 minutes. So I probably didn't just see this and spur of the moment and take the photo, but rather, again, was out in the kayak. This was midday. I remember taking a little paddle for my lunch break with my camera because I knew that there was some active snags out in the swamp where I could get a photo like this. And so I'm sure I watched them come back and forth several times, used those opportunities to make sure I was lined up well. So I had kind of the sun at my back, so I was able to properly expose both the tree snag as well as the proper focal depth to get the birds within, a couple feet of that snag in focus, but also have that nice bouquet in the background with the leaves and the branches back there, not too distracting because they're kind of blurred out. And again, the eye and the focus of the parent, as well as the obvious begging and gaping from the baby tree swallow, really kind of tells its own story. But I had plenty of opportunity to line that up, use burst mode or beast mode, if you want to call it that, in order to, practice and get this photo just right. And I'm sure I had, 50 or 100 more different frames of this and really picked the best one. Also, one last thing, I love that this one does not have any hand of man at all. So it's a purely natural thing. I didn't even curate the nest in this case. I just showed up in the swamp and photographed it.
I've noticed in a couple of the images we've gone through, this one included, you've talked a lot about prepping for your shot or prepping your site. What does that mean?
Yeah, you don't always get to choose your background or your lighting, but if you have the opportunity to choose a background and wait for the bird to come into that can often make a really compelling shot. In this case, I more or less was able to set up my lighting with the sun at my back. It turned out that this was sort of a head-on shot of the nest hole, but I could have gone up to 90 degrees to the right or left to pick different angles. This one happened to work out nicely. The background wasn't too much of a consideration, but having multiple opportunities to hone in on my settings. In situations like this, I like to use my shutter priority setting, meaning I knew I needed something fast. This was probably 1500 to 2000, 1/1500th to 1/2000th of a second. I don't have the metadata, but I knew I needed it to be fast, and the bokeh in the background and the ISO were secondary. But those are also good settings that a new photographer can use to let your input define the critical factor. In this case, it's the speed of the shutter, and then let the camera determine the other things. And then if you have some time to practice an image like this, like I had with multiple opportunities, then you can start to hone in on what the right combination is in that golden triangle, and then move over to manual mode if you want to finally adjust it. Which is what I often do when I have lots of different opportunities. I like to, if I have a subject, try to shoot it with multiple different combinations of stuff because it gets you some more artistic outputs when you do that too.
And now for the best image of them all, I will say out of all the photography Dustin's done, this is my absolute favorite shot of his that he's ever taken. It's just absolutely beautiful. It looks almost like an oil painting. We've always had great blue herons on our lake. I have like a very soft spot in my heart for them because we see them sometimes hanging out on our dock and stuff. Do you remember how you felt like when you reviewed this image and realized what you had captured here?
I do remember. The story behind this one is interesting. It looks like it's nighttime or something, but I promise you it was literally in the minutes right after technical sunrise, but probably about 15 minutes after sunrise when the sun here comes up above the trees and hits the lake for the first time. So I had just paddled off of our dock not more than 100 yards or so, leaving around sunrise, and came upon this great blue heron who was standing, probably having spent the whole night on the mud flat on the right-hand side of our lake. And I know that they often will stay there until just a few minutes after sunrise. When the sun hits them and they start to warm up, they'll either move to a new location because they want to rest somewhere else in the shade, or it's time to get out hunting. So I had actually stopped in the kayak and spent 5 or 10 minutes kind of at a distance watching this bird and playing with different camera settings. So I was partly using the background trees, but I knew that one of the best pieces of advice I'd ever been given was to create artistic photography. Don't worry about exposing for the entire scene. Focus on exposing for your subject. So I was really keen on picking up the white, but not overexposing the white on the heron's face and getting the bird well exposed. What I didn't expect was for it to take off when it did, but I was prepared and I had the right settings dialed in. And so as I clicked off a few of these pictures, I thought I probably had a little more of the green and water background and kind of the reflection, but it had moved from the lighting that was in across into a little bit more of a different lighting situation. And so the exposure that I had pre-dialed in wasn't exactly right, but it really paid off because I was perfectly exposed for my subject, and it made for a really dramatic image because the background was underexposed, but not totally. So if you look closely, of course, you can see the ripples behind the bird, but above and below the bird, you can actually see the trees in the distance on the far shoreline and the reflection of those trees. So you do get a little sense of that environment while retaining the high contrast between the bird and the dark background.
Yeah, they're like these vertical stripes that you can see almost coming down. On the back of the image.
And after the bird flew away and I took a moment to look down at the LED screen on the back of my camera, it took my breath away because I knew I had taken a really special photograph. If I have any regret about this one at all, it's just that there's not enough space in front of the bird. I'd like to have had a little more canvas out there, which I could do, digitally, but I'm a purist that way.
And so to confirm, this was early light. Did you adjust the exposure to make the background drop away?
Yeah, I didn't though. I was really focused on just getting the exposure right for the bird. So this was 1/500th of a second, which is about right for a large bird in flight. And I can see the ISO was very low, ISO 160. So it was actually in pretty bright light, but it was exposed well with the shadows in the background to be able to capture it this way.
Okay, so for folks who want to try bird in flight photography, or birders who are trying to improve in that area, when they're out with their cameras, where should they start?
Well, start humble because bird photography, and especially bird in flight photography, is the deep end of the pool. So some birders are pure birders and non-photographers, and then they want to grab a camera and start with bird photography. That's what I did. It's just the hard way to do it. The other path is that photographers start and they gradually want more and more challenging photography, and they work their way up to birds. A lot of them are pure photographers and not pure birders. And they're great too. There's no one perfect way to do it, but exist in the space that makes you happy, right? If you just want basic photographs to ID birds, great. If you want to get more and more advanced, great. In my case, it was more of a personal challenge to take a better picture of a bird than I'd ever taken of it before, or take a picture of a bird a species that I'd never seen before. So whatever it is that, cranks your gears, live in that space most of all. But tips for bird in flight photography specifically is get familiar with your camera and the shutter speeds you need for different birds, because large birds move really slowly. You can shoot at a much longer shutter speed to get greater detail for a bird like the great blue heron that we saw in the bald eagles. But smaller birds, you need to be at least 1/1200th or maybe even 1/2000th for your shutter speed. So get familiar with that kind of stuff and know that if you're shooting, a hummingbird, you need to be really high. And if you're shooting a warbler, maybe just a little bit lower. If it's a robin or a scarlet tanager or something like that, know the range for that stuff. And then nextly, backgrounds are really important, right? Avoid backgrounds with hand of man all over them. Don't hesitate to set up your scene a little bit. If you have a good feeder station, put, an elevated log behind it that birds will take to as a good place to rest before they go to the feeder, because you can get a much better photograph from that log that has no hand of man in it than from on the feeder, that kind of stuff. But also practice your autofocus tracking from your camera. Know your camera's settings because, out of the box, your camera might focus just on the center square. But if you put it in, say, wildlife mode or autofocus tracking, that center square will move with the bird it's detecting around your screen and help you stay on it. And then lastly, right, try to line up a shot that has something either interesting in the background or that has the background off in the distance, because then you're going to get that nice bouquet that pulls the bird out in front of you. And sometimes a bird just up in the sky can be a great picture with really fine detail for the bird. It's just not artistically interesting because there's nothing but blue in the background or things like that. And if you don't have those opportunities, be ready for when the bird does something unexpected, like this picture of a gull that came through with a large shell in its mouth. In any case, I forget what kind it is. But those sorts of things give you a photo with a lot more interest than just a bird on a blue background.
Yeah, I love that picture of that gull. He's absolutely hilarious. Anything else you want to mention to viewers before we close out this topic for the week?
I would just say, like I said, live in the place that gets you fired up. If you like taking pictures of birds at the feeder, great. If you like taking pictures just of nest boxes or focusing on shorebirds or warblers, great. Live in that space, whatever makes you happy, because there's all different flavors of birding and photography. And those things change over time. So you're going to have different eras of what you like to do. Whatever era is, getting you going today, live in that place and enjoy it. And a question for our listeners: if you've ever tried photographing birds in flight, what's been the biggest challenge for you? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what you're struggling with so we can talk more about it in a future episode.
Okay, everyone. So in previous episodes, we introduced you to our local Nestbox program that Dustin manages. Today, we have an exciting update. It's a girl.
And a boy and a girl and 4 more boys and 4 more girls. There were 12 hatched ducklings. And no, I have no idea if they were 6 and 6, but go with the law of averages there.
Yay. So the wood duck eggs in one of the nest boxes that we've been updating you guys on in previous episodes has hatched. Dustin, can you give us the details on this big news in our family?
Absolutely. Not only did they hatch, but it was a very successful fledge. So wood ducks jump out of the nest box the very day after they are hatched, and we have great interior box footage of that. But starting at the beginning of the story, according to my records, we knew that estimated hatch date was going to be around May 15th. And it so happens that on the morning of May 14th, I started getting an unusually large number of alerts for that camera inside the nest box. So I got online and went to check out what those clips were all about.
All right, and let's take a look. Are you ready?
Yep.
So what we're going to show you is a montage of all of the clips that were taken starting on May 14th and going straight through to the end on May 15th, right?
That's right. These cameras really just capture 30 seconds at a time and have a rest period in between. So think of this as sort of like a 24-hour time lapse of video of what happened from hatch through jump. So first is I noticed that the hen, after all those alerts, was actually moving eggs around, and she started kind of manipulating an empty egg, and they actually eat the eggshells to replenish calcium.
You can hear little tweets.
Yeah, I can't tell if it's the hen cooing to the babies to encourage them to hatch. We can see there at the top there's a broken egg, and now on the lower left, one is hatched. The empty egg is on the lower left, and the mom is now tending to that baby, telling it, like, go to sleep. Or cleaning it off, I don't know exactly.
He went to sleep so fast.
Punk.
She's like, finally, he's down for a nap.
So that was at like 8 or 9 a.m., which is earlier than I've noticed them hatching before. And then later in the day, we finally got a view of all of the babies that had hatched when Mom went out for her normal break in the afternoon.
Look at how adorable they are. And
She took a much shorter break than usual and came back to the nest after about 45 minutes only.
she was probably worried about her babies.
Yep. And so you can start to see like how much energy these little ducklings have and all the work the mom has. And there she is eating one of the eggshells again too. That one at the bottom flapping its wings, getting ready. So later on this day, I actually turned off the camera to conserve battery because I didn't want to miss jump day. And so in the morning, she came out and was looking to see if the coast was clear, but for whatever reason, she decided this wasn't the time, not quite yet, so she went down back into the nest. I've seen them all look up at the hole, straight at the camera.
They're so sweet. And you can already see markings on them.
Yeah, and if you look closely, you can even see their egg tooth. That's the
Yeah.
little white dot at the tip of their beak that they use to break through the egg. Now, a little while later, about 20 minutes later, she went to see if the coast was clear again. And this time, she actually did leave the nest. So from here, we're going to see that she disappears and the babies have all started jumping. There was like a minute or two where the camera was not on. So where there's 12 babies here, the next shot only shows about half of them, and they're still working their way out of the nest.
And she's calling for them as she's leaving the box. So now half of them are outside with her, and you can see Dustin put this grating up, which makes it easier for them to climb out.
Yeah, but they're not always good at knowing that that's
Oh,
the
no.
way to go.
No, you gotta go that way, guy. Oh, he got it. But wait.
This is the last little duckling.
Oh, I feel so bad for him.
You can hear it calling to the mom and siblings.
And they're waiting for him outside, right?
Of course.
Oh, buddy, turn around. Oh, no. What if he doesn't find his way out?
Well, luckily we had a camera in the box so that I knew I was able to check. And
He's gone.
yep, we didn't get the very last shot because the camera was taking a break between trigger actions. But we know that the box was empty. They all clearly hatched successfully
That's awesome.
and fledged successfully. So that was 12 out of 12 successful fledge.
Okay, so now they're out of the nest box. So, like, what happens now?
Well, so these babies can feed themselves and they can swim and they can walk and stuff. So the mom just leads them off into the swamp where they eat all the duckweed and the aquatic invertebrates that they can find and feed themselves. It actually was raining pretty heavily that morning when they fledged, so they might have spent some time sheltered under her wings if they got tired. But mostly they're going to be swimming around in the thick vegetation along the edge of the swamp until later on in the summer. We'll start to see them emerge onto the mud flats and stuff when they start to, think about flying. But they won't be flying at all until, September or so.
That's amazing. I'm so excited. Okay, so any final thoughts from you as you're kind of like the hospital for wood duck boxes. Like you're the maternity ward. Like any final thoughts about this?
A little bit. We're lucky that that last duckling did make it out of the box. I've had occasions where one duckling didn't make it out for some reason, or actually it was one that it didn't hatch quite in time with all the rest. So when I went back to check the box that year, there was a partially hatched duckling and the family had all gone. So that one went off to a rehabber. So this is helpful in having the camera inside the box, because if that had happened, I was checking it within 5 minutes and I would have been able to go manually remove that duckling and get it back reunited with its family. But luckily we didn't have to do any of that stuff.
And when you talk about a rehabber, you're talking about someone you know who's a licensed wildlife rehabber in the state of Massachusetts.
Correct. We actually drove them to Rhode Island because there's not that many of them. But yeah, for sure. But yeah, hopefully there is another Nestbox out there that a hen has been checking out. Now it's getting late in the season, but she's been checking out a couple days in a row. We might actually have a chance for another filmed jump day. And if we're lucky, this one is closer to a good vantage point. So if that one happens, we'll be able to get some exterior shots as well. But until then, here's a clip from a previous jump day so everyone can see the view from the outside and what it looks like as the hen gathers the babies and they make their way off into the world.
Okay, so that is all for this episode. But before we head off on our next adventure, we do have an update on an adjustment that we're making to our format now that spring and the warm weather has finally arrived in Massachusetts.
Yeah, it's officially our busy season here at Hike and Hearth. Every spring it speeds up on us. So between fieldwork, citizen science, capturing wildlife photography, we're out in nature more than ever. But to make sure we continue to bring you thoughtful, quality content, we're shifting to a bi-weekly schedule for the podcast.
But don't worry, you'll still see us on the off weeks. We'll be posting shorter videos that are more candid, maybe something with a little bit of the behind the scenes feel. And as always, you can find Dustin's Wildlife Photography and links to all of our content channels at hikeandhearth.com.
Yep, and we've got some secret projects coming up too that we'll highlight over the next couple weeks, so be sure to subscribe on our YouTube channel and follow us at Hike and Hearth Birding on Instagram and Substack to keep up with everything we're doing in the field.
Okay, Dustin, I think it's about time for you to send us and our viewers all off on our next adventures.
It sure is, so until next time, friends, keep your eyes on the skies and your hearts in the wild.
Bye, everyone.